take just a second. Sometimes this thing goes live before it tells me it's live, so we might be sitting here just jabbering at people, but that's all right.
So don't pick your nose.
Don't pick, yes. If you were going to, maybe
If you
hold
had
off.
the inclination.
Awesome. Well, we are live on YouTube. Hello, everybody. Hi, David. Nice to see you there. I got your email this morning and just responded to it a little bit ago. It is Monday, December 22nd. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce. I am joined as usual by Jennifer Friend, and today we are joined by Jeff St. James. And Jeff is the host of the Ask a Brother podcast. Jeff invited me to have a conversation with him. I don't know, that was about a month ago, I think, a few weeks ago anyway. And it was great. And he has a wonderful audience. And I really enjoyed that. It was a live stream, and you have some great people who are part of your following and you're involved in your work. So it was a delight. And I'm excited to see you again and be able to chat with you and have the chance to ask you a bunch of questions and learn more about your background. So thanks so much for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me into your space and for coming on my platform. Me having a less than 1 year old platform, I got actual professionals and people that matter actually coming on. So that's pretty cool. So thank you.
Well, you're doing very good work, and it's a very nice thing that you're building over there. You're great at it. So it was a delight to be able to join. Hi to Riff Rock and James from Bahia. Nice to see you, student of rhythm. Nice to see everybody today. And David says he was just listening to or looking forward to listening to the Josh Slocum interview. That was a great one. I really enjoy Josh. I always enjoy talking with him. He's an interesting man, and I had a good conversation with him. Hope you enjoy it. Solid Ground is a peer support community for people who are struggling with all kinds of authoritarian ideologies and trying to figure out how to sort through all of it and connect with other people who see things going on in the world in a similar way. It's a very diverse group of people, but it is a very supportive and lovely group. And so if you guys are looking for that kind of connection, please feel free to join us. And we've started something new this month of December, which we hope to just keep going, which is that after these live streams, we welcome our members in for a members only chat. So we stop streaming, stop recording, and we continue the dialogue with Solid Ground members. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, check us out. You can find us on Substack at, I think it's Solid Ground Support, but I'll put a link in the description as always. And so Jeff, you have been doing this for 1 year. You're an LPC. And so how long have you been in the counseling field? How did you get into the work of a counselor? And how have you seen that field? Because I know a lot of your work centers on challenging some of the problems that you see in the mental health space. So what's been your progress from I want to be a counselor to wow, what the heck is going on here? And where are you at with that?
Great. I appreciate it. And yeah, I did start the podcast this particular year. I got into the field of mental health professional counseling back in 2014. And I've been doing it ever since, working in prisons, schools, courthouses, and now an outpatient program in Philly, which is the largest mental health nonprofit in the city of Philadelphia. So we're busy. We see a lot of patients and clients. And our goal for me being brought to the team and working with the various people who both brought me in and work alongside me was to raise the bar of professional, high quality mental health professionals in the urban environment. What tends to happen is, especially in the poorer cities and areas, therapists will go there just to get their credentials. They get their clinical hours. And then once they get what they need, they bounce. They go to the nicer areas. They go to the suburbs. They go to work in, various other spots that like they don't have to be in the hood and the urban spots anymore. So I stayed, and I'm also from here. So it was my childhood home is actually 2 blocks from here. My grandmother's right around the corner. So me coming and staying and helping quadruple the amount of licensed staff that we have in house, it's important to me. And, making sure a lot of the people that we have here not only licensed, but have evidence-based certifications like prolonged exposure, training the next generation of therapists to make sure that they know how to not freak out when somebody talks about the worst experiences or things that's happening in their environment, that's been my lane. So that's what I stick to. That's what I'm passionate about. But in the midst of it, what I found shocking was probably around 2018, 2019, I started to notice a much significant shift in what was happening in the field. I was kind of prepped for it because of the particular religious, program that I had went to for graduate school. So they had kind of warned us about stuff that was happening with the DSM, I think 4 at that time. And, they were kind of letting, or it was either recent 5 or 4, and they were kind of letting us know things were happening in the field that they were concerned about, and to just be mindful of that when it came to certain approaches relating to gender affirming care, always agreeing with the new models and new approaches to things and never kind of questioning or critiquing authority. They kind of told us that back then. And, as a student, you're just trying to pass classes and get done and get your thesis in so you can move on with your life. And then you find your job and you move on. And you kind of forget about that stuff until the cases actually start to come. And they were pretty rare. But it wasn't until about 2018, 2019 that I started to really notice when I came back to Philly for work. Then I was like, okay, so when I was working in the male prison prior to that, a lot of this stuff it was very much focused on recidivism and criminality and, them staying clean and everything. But then when I came back to outpatient and we're working in nonprofits, anything the state says, anything that's on the federal level, that nonprofit is going to follow suit. And especially if you're taking the insurance from the city or from the state. And we started looking at the required trainings. We started looking at what we have to kind of validate and acknowledge and just, accept on face value. And I was starting to question it. And I'm asking this to my bosses. I'm asking this to other trained professionals who work 20 plus years in the field. And I'm like, so nobody's going to question that any of this is going a bit far? Like, we looked at no data about people who we're saying we have to constantly affirm in terms of them regretting it, stating that this is bad, this is wrong, that this involves children. Nobody's going to speak on any of this. And I'm starting to push back. And I noticed in the workplace, I noticed amongst people who were their ideology and politics already aligned with it. So they had no problem with just consenting, agreeing, following the new protocol. And I was like, don't you think it's strange that we now have to say something or have to call someone something or have to agree to something, even if it's at risk and it involves surgery? You guys don't think that this is a little, and how do we know a kid can't get it wrong? How do we know a parent can't get it wrong? How do we know a parent can't be pushing a child to do this? And that started the trickle effect of questioning a whole host of things in terms of the general enforced consensus. And I was starting to analyze, and then I was looking back and I was re-questioning everything in terms of our pharmacology models in the country, looking at Black boys, which is something I'm extremely passionate about, and being like, all right, the prison to school pipeline, we're getting diagnosed with extremely high rates of ADHD and oppositional defiant, and the go-to is always to get them on pills and put them in smaller classrooms where other boys also have issues, and a lot of them are dropping out. And I'm like, something's off. And it took me, like it always happens. You start to notice things, you start questioning, you go down the rabbit hole. And before you know it, in my head, it went from I'm alone, no one else is really talking about this. I saw like Jordan Peterson trending, talking about free speech back years ago, but it didn't really hit home until about 6-7 years ago for me. And then after, I guess, sitting on my hands for a while, I finally decided, you know what, F it. I'm going to do the podcast thing, let the chips fall where they may, and launching it January 2nd or 3rd of this year. I think as of now, we cleared about 3.1 million views so far, 36,000 subscribers, and we still have another week to go of the year. So it's been an honor. It ain't all been positive, but it's been awesome to see men, women, parents, couples, people from UK, South Africa, DR last week, checking in, reaching out, connecting, and wanting to build and collaborate on how to have a much more objective and balanced approach to all of these discussions, from mental health, education, to just how we talk about politics, and getting away from like groupthink and just always having to follow the trend of whatever is trendy right now, and getting back to objectivity, critical thinking, being allowed to even ask questions, talk about certain topics. There's people that's like, if I'm a man, you're not allowed to talk about women. I hear all the time, what type of man they want, or what type of man they deserve. And so I went from, let me do this with mental health, to let me do this across the board and open up the doors so people can get free enough to be allowed to just think and speak and acknowledge if they agree or don't agree and why. So that's been what I've been basically pushing up until this point.
Well, thank you so much for that description and that arc. So it sounds like it was really, there were a lot of things that were making you shake your head a little bit. You had a lot of concerns, but it was really the gender affirming care thing that kind of broke through, and you said, this doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go continue.
No, I'm curious, like, what was your concept of, how did you understand why people were pushing that? Because that's something I don't think we talk about enough. Like, why it's easy to imagine that everybody's got this big agenda, but when it comes down to it, these are teachers, counselors, parents who think they're doing the right thing for this kid in this instance. And when you stand outside of that and you look in, you think this is incredibly harmful, and I want to reject everything that you're saying and doing here. But they think that they're doing something compassionate. At
Mm-hmm.
least that's one way of looking at it. So I'm just wondering, what did you think when you were hearing people say this stuff?
There's two ways I could answer this, and one answer will definitely be the one that gets me deplatformed and get this channel shut down. So I'm not going to give that answer in terms of funding and origination of some of this stuff. All
Oh,
I'll
you
state
can
is,
you can go right ahead. I don't care if this gets me demonetized. I
oh,
really think
then
that these are important to talk about. So please, you go right ahead.
yeah, I think this is a lot older than
Mhm.
what's presently happening. I think that people who looked at what happened between World War I and World War II, looked at European history, particularly what was going on in Berlin, in Germany, those that read into it and look at this ideology and compare and see what was happening back then, that actually heavily influenced our educational system over here. I won't speak anything more other than that, but I do think that those who haven't made those connections or looked into it and see that word for word, bar for bar, the very things we're battling and tackling with culturally, politically, and in our respective fields, this is no different than what was happening back then with the Germans. And what the Germans were discovering and learning what was happening to their children, what was being espoused, certain books, and even down to book burning that was happening back then. It was a lot of literature that was relating to this stuff. So I'll just leave it at that for those to kind of research and look into that. And those same entities, sorry, same people who were pushing it back then, behind the scenes, when you find out and see who's on many boards, who owns many of our curriculums as far as books, who pushes a lot. If you even look at the very groups that stand for this and who's funding them, so it's the same. It's a lot of the same people. And then because of how much many of our political representatives are captured due to lobbying groups. One of the same lobbying groups, same groups that own many of our core curriculum books, are same group that was pushing this type of ideology back in Germany in the mid 1900s, early 1900s. Yeah, it's the same people. And the interesting thing is they're so strong and so powerful. And Orwell talked about this in 1984. If you can get to the women or the children, you can completely destabilize a region without having to shoot a single bullet. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now from a culture war standpoint. There is a cultural war and divide, like you said, of ideology. And right now, for a long time now, the extremists on the left are dominating spaces where we're teaching children. We have children for 7 to 8 hours a day. They're shaming people, but especially women, who don't acquiesce and agree and affirm certain things. And in regards to men and boys, across the board, like when we say there's like an attack on masculinity, it was its worst historically and presently in the Black community. What you all are seeing now is what's been happening since the 60s in the Black community, in
Mhm.
terms of re-questioning of roles, in terms of who gets to dominate work fields, whose feelings matter more. Helen Andrews, who I think everybody's now been pretty familiar with, she's talked about the great feminization of Westernized culture, and that a culture that's overly feminized will, if an ideology comes in that's problematic, but it's to be accepted, they're less likely to push back. They're more agreeable. They're more interested in cohesion and agreeableness and getting along versus challenging and pushing back. So basically, if you get too many individuals that think like that, as therapists, as psychologists, as teachers, as doctors, as politicians, and as other major figures, every sphere that is going to impact when people are weak, when they're at their lowest point, when they're young and learning, even on the higher academic level of the liberalization of our college areas. I grew up as a liberal, so and I grew up as a Democrat my whole life. So they can't do to me what people who have only grown up Republican or conservative their whole lives. You can't fool me in terms of what you're actually espousing, what you're actually pushing for. And I can go from point A to point B and point to the harm that this stuff is causing. So that's, to me, what I think is of really what's going on is there's political people with certain agendas. And I'll flat out say it, it's a form of Marxism, which is really cultural Marxism, where if you read enough history, and this is really the thing, I think a lot of these people that push this stuff, advocate for it, it's so much about feeling good and supporting people regardless of what they believe, to where it's like they haven't done the critical work to look at the origins of these ideologies. And when I say cultural Marxism, is it necessarily like an academic term? No, but it absolutely captures what's going on. Originally, from a Marxist lens, it was all about oppressed versus oppressor from an economic standpoint, right? The haves and the have-nots. And that was how you saw a divided society. The people at the top that are now deemed as the oppressors financially are constantly oppressing the working class or the poor. The second wave of these Marxists and the communists specifically in the 50s and 60s in the US started to look at the bedrocks and the institutions and figure out, because remember, we had McCarthyism, we had a whole bunch of things that tried to fight against this. And they had to figure out a much more subtle way to be able to influence the churches, influence the schools, and to influence all of these different spheres that are more amenable. It's very, very hard to amend the engineering field to this stuff. It's very hard to amend electrical work because it's very straightforward. But when you have these more open fields where there's a lot more subjectivity, a lot more nuance, a lot more room for human expression and disagreement, it's not that they push for disagreement, they just push for a whole new ideology and stated this is the new truth. And the difference was this go around, what they did with cultural Marxism is they took that oppressed oppressor framework and they applied it to everything. So now they applied it to gender, they applied it to race, they applied it to sexuality. And what you do with that is now the individuals who are deemed as the lower tier oppressed class are seen in one light, and the people who are viewed as the oppressed class are seen in another light. And depending on which boxes you do or don't check off, it determines whether you double or triple the victim or double the triple the oppressor. So I'm half and half because I'm a man, I'm a heterosexual man, but I'm also Black and born here as a minority. So apparently I get to check off both boxes. But the problem is if that type of way of viewing people is greater than whether or not what they're saying, what they're doing is good or bad, right or wrong, true or false, you're going to run into a scenario where a lot of people can get away with a lot of harmful things, harmful behaviors for the sake of the fact that they are Black, for the sake of the fact that they're a white male, for the sake that they're heterosexual, et cetera. And it will continually divide within itself. Where if you were somebody who was really, really in it, like me, I was at one point, I went to some meetings with the PSL, I think it was PSL, the socialist organization during the whole 2020, 2024 run. I just went behind the scenes just to see what they were espousing and pushing. And it was no different. In fact, it was even worse. And when I realized, like, oh, these people are teachers. These people have real jobs. And if these people have jobs where they can impact, so an example of what this would look like in a counseling session with a couple, or even a single session with a single woman coming in, not saying a woman by herself coming in and talk about her relationship issues. If you have a person whose view of the patriarchy is that it's so overexpansive, so dominant, and such a way of viewing everything, and that their view is that men are the oppressors in society by default, you could run into a scenario where you're having women who's bringing their marriages and their relationships and placing it into hands of professionals who have an ideological viewpoint that's anti-men, anti-leadership, anti-husbands. And I'm like, wait a minute, why? If more people are using therapy than ever before, and our marriages and society and relationships are more broken and divided than ever before, maybe rather than blaming the customers or the men or the women per se, maybe we need to evaluate the product itself. And I think for a long time, up until recently, the mental health field, by and large, a lot of fields that we kind of take for granted, they've kind of escaped scrutiny. And and they could have all these extremely misandrous, biased people in these fields that hate white men, hate masculinity, hate anything that challenges some of the newer forms of gender affirmation, anything that conflicts with whatever the new 10 years ago, most Democrats and liberals weren't talking about these things. It wasn't even on their radar, and now it is. And it's like, I've now seen and heard therapists say they will not meet with Trump supporters. That is not what a therapist is supposed to be effing doing. So if you're espousing things that's anti-intellectual diversity, political diversity, anti-marriage, pushing women to constantly be back on their own and going back out to the streets, all of this is broken. All of this is wrong. And now we have way more activists who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And that's teachers and psychologists and you name it, that's pushing victim ideology and all type of ideology that's not going to help people in that real everyday world. So, challenging that and being a man in a space that's overwhelmingly dominated by people who either agree with this or silently agree with me but will not stand or support it, you feel like you're kind of on an island with this type of stuff. So that's what I've been noticing and seeing, and it sounds like you all and more people are aware of it and are starting to finally push back.
Yeah, I thank you so much for that analysis. And with people in the chat are agreeing with you. David LeBoy, Gramsci, Long March Through the Institutions. Indubitable Babel says Prussian ed is too powerful a weapon. It's like either technology, you use it or get beat by it. Who is it here? Somebody said you should read John Taylor Gatto, James from Bahia. John Taylor Gatto is well worth some time. If you haven't already read him, I totally recommend that too. He was a New York City school teacher who is considered the father of the unschooling movement, because he talked about how the sort of one size fits all conformity machine that is our compulsory education system really doesn't serve to make strong individuals who have really honed their own skills and become independent people. Rather, it just makes conformist robots for the system. But he's great. I totally recommend him. Yeah, Kenneth Cole says that 100% accurate what he's saying. Thank you guys for chiming in. It is it is very interesting how these ideologies have been used to divide people, make them resentful and suspicious of one another. And I think what you're saying about the feminist work in this area is particularly salient right now, as we're seeing more and more of the fruits of that bearing out over time. Making women want to distrust relationships, and there's some reason for that too. That's something we've gotten into quite a lot in this channel over time. We've talked about the reasons why families start falling apart. There's more distrust between men and women. It starts to make sense for older women to say to younger women, make sure you have a good job, because if you get left holding the bag, you're going to really hurt if you've got a bunch of kids and you don't have any kind of skills. So there's reasons for that distrust, but there's also a way in which it's being echoed and perpetuated through things like education, through the mental health system that counsels people to divorce oftentimes, or can perpetuate problems between spouses. And something I've seen is this kind of manosphere reaction, which it seems to echo the same issue, but in the other direction. It's like, no, we are oppressed. You have oppressed us. And so you see that same thing. So it's kind of brilliant how whoever kicked off this ideology kicked off a thing that's going to perpetuate and echo back and forth, so that, Black people will say that they're oppressed and white people are the oppressors until they've oppressed the white people so much that the white people will start to say they're oppressed, and it's the critical race theorists that are the oppressors. And the women will be taught that they are oppressed until they oppress the men so hard in retribution for their oppression that the men become the oppressed class, and they can point at the women for oppressing them. So it's this amazing self-perpetuating loop. And I think that the only way we get out of it is by everybody saying, let's kind of go forward and drop resentment, and be able to identify, what does human flourishing look like? What should our relationships with our fellow human beings look like? What does love between a man and a woman, what does a family need to look like? What we should identify in the positive instead of continually focusing on these resentments. But that seems to be a very difficult thing to do. And I'm curious for both of you, what are your thoughts on that?
Jennifer.
Well, I have so many I have so many worries about the direction we're headed in. And I agree with what you're saying about how men and women are sort of being pitted against each other. And a male and a female, that's sort of the foundational unit of cooperation, because that forms the family, which forms the society. So to me, it's kind of like some of these ideologies are like little termites eating away at the foundation. And, I think about, there is truth that there is some real hostility towards men, which is always sort of packaged and framed as positivity and encouragement towards women. But putting up signs in schools saying things like the future is female, what if there were signs saying the future is white? How creepy would that be? Right?
Insane.
But this is okay somehow. And how does that make boys feel? And the fact that there's a lot of companies that are being told, if it's a choice between a man and a woman, even if the woman has slightly less experience and is less credentialed, always hire the woman. And this is happening, in the sciences as well as other fields. And, do we want to create a whole generation of men that essentially just give up, that feel there's really no place for me vocationally? So that the women, are those the men we want to marry? And is that who we want to have kids with? Where now we really have to do it all, support the man and have the children. I think we're creating something that is going to really bite us in the butt if we don't stop moving in this negative trajectory. I see men and women as complementary to each other, and each possessing unique strengths, and that we can really help each other and do great things together. And that's being attacked and eroded. And it just infuriates me and kind of scares me a little bit.
Jennifer, we got to find out where's your chef hat, because you was cooking. That's exactly the stuff that I've been trying to point out. And it's funny how when I say it, just by the fact of being a man, I'm now misogynist. Depending on which crowds of people that are watching or will watch this, they'll say that you're being male centered, right? Or you need to decenter men. So really in my mind, there's probably a handful of things that are going on, but the top of the list is language itself. we've allowed people with these particular ideological viewpoints to dominate and dictate speech, so that if you say the wrong thing or don't endorse what they want you to endorse, they have a whole list of things that they can call you from. For a male, if you bring up this is hypocritical, this is a double standard, um, they'll be like, you're whining, you hate women, you're gay, X, Y, and Z. If you're a woman, oh, you're being man-centered, you're being a pick-me, you hate trans people. Like, it just gets to a point where they figured out a way. And again, Orwell was talking about this back then, where it was like, if they can control the language, they can control your freedom of expression. If they can control that, they can effectively control you. There doesn't have to be a bullet shot. There doesn't have to be, this is the battle without physical weapons. This is an ideological war, and it's so much more pervasive because what is it resulted in? Men and women hating each other by and large, in terms of what we're seeing on the internet, what the trends are, relationships not being what they used to be, families not growing, the replacement rate is off the chain, off the wall, off the rails. So I'm like, now this is the issue. I just did an episode last week on the truth about Black fatigue, right? Where you're getting white people, particularly one more on the conservative end, and even non-whites who are Black, immigrants who are all espousing having Black fatigue. What they're basically describing is problematic, toxic, or even ghetto ratchet behavior that they're seeing on social media and potentially in person. And they're talking about the behaviors, they're talking about what they're seeing. And this is usually the same crowd that's talking about what Jennifer was talking about the hiring practices that was impacting especially and specifically white males. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is exactly what Leslie was talking about, is that depending on the space, they're subject to having blind spots because they're trying to advocate for a particular perspective. So right now, as a person who's been in my role and position, I've had to report to the city of Philadelphia 6 years in a row, DEI results. So when people are arguing about these things and whether or not it's happening or not, or if companies are doing preferential treatment or not, I actually had to report the data. And we're not reporting the data just because. We're reporting the data because there obviously is some financial backing on the other end, depending on whatever ratios we have. And what were they asking me? How many women do we have? How many minorities do we have? And if we have anybody that's handicapped. Those are typically the three: minorities, women, and the handicap were the numbers I had to give. And they asked me that like 2 months ago for our fiscal year for 2025. So I've reported this a bunch of times. And even back in 2019, they weren't calling it. I mean, we weren't referencing it as DEI. It was just what it was. But as the hiring manager and the people who work with me, we're just looking at resumes and going off of what we need. Nobody from the top down has told me, yo, Jeff, make sure you hire some more women. Make sure you hire some more Black or brown people. But on the back end, now we work in a predominantly Black neighborhood. Overwhelmingly, our staff is pretty diverse and mixed. We have some bilingual people, but on the back end, we are reporting data, and it just so happens that we're meeting the metrics that's meeting what the current political trend is. So we're going to get the kickbacks. But there's other companies that are a lot more direct with that. So this idea that like when white men specifically are saying this is happening and other people are getting in or cutting the line or potentially not having the same qualifications, there's merit to that. The reason why I brought up the Black fatigue thing and in comparison to this is because I want people to understand, if you want people to acknowledge when white men are saying they're being discriminated against, if you want people to acknowledge, and we have policies and evidence to show that, and we need to acknowledge their experience. And if you have men saying, hey, when I get in the courtroom, things are not being treated fairly. Why is it that she gets the kids by default and I have to fight for my kids? Something's off here. Why is there an assumption when there's an allegation that I'm guilty until proven innocent, when she's innocent until proven guilty? Like, men are acknowledging this is a double standard. Women have their grievances of what they're stating. And then when it comes to Black people, we're all victims. We're all making everything up. None of us experienced racism. So because we weren't slaves, now our whole experience has to be completely doubted and invalidated. the same approach that you want to have with a reevaluation of this stuff, where women have some grievances, men have some grievances, white people, black people, and everybody in between, the nuance is going case by case, person by person.
Yeah.
What happens is when we make these broad, sweeping generalizations that are in the negative, what ends up happening is we pick the side that we most align with, and anybody that doesn't align with it, now they're off, now they're crazy, now they're broken. And in reality, it's like it's the most extreme people who are often getting the loudest voices and loudest platforms covering the most algorithms. And now that shapes
Absolutely.
everything. That shapes
Yeah.
everything. So for me, it starts with the language. It starts with working with people one-on-one and actually seeing truly where they actually are. And then once you've established and made it clear where their ideology is, express it very clearly so that they can hear what that means. So when somebody says, believe all women, that means by default, and I'll say this, that means every man is guilty.
Mm-hmm.
That includes your sons, your fathers, your brothers.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? And they say, oh, no, not mine. And I said, well, everybody that's related to men feel the exact same way you do, but you're espousing something like that. When you say the future is female, what does that mean? So
Yeah.
when you take the trendy things that people are saying or claiming, and then you espouse that onto any of these ideologies, it really does break down pretty easily, especially in one-on-one conversations. When you try to do this on social media, when you try to do this in group settings, you're going to get the exact opposite results 9 times out of 10. Most people don't like waking up and realizing they were wrong, that they were voting and pushing things that were harmful, and that in the end that they were fooled. It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they were fooled.
They were fooled. Yeah.
So that's what it is. And what I've learned now, being in the quote, according to everybody else, apparently I'm in the manosphere space, although I cover a whole bunch of different topics. I've learned in my community the niceness, the coddling, the inching closer, that doesn't work in my community. Overwhelmingly, it doesn't work. What does work is the very thing that's keeping them in line is the very thing that's going to get them to realize they got to finally leave this spot. They're trying to avoid being stigmatized and shamed. So what I'm now doing is bringing shame back into my community. That's how we got to things of being so degenerate and everything goes and we're not allowed to have standards with what we're wearing, what we're displaying, what we're showing, how we're dancing, how we're carrying ourselves in public. We have to remove all shame because you're not allowed to judge. Now I'm judging.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I'm judging. So when I'm now giving men prescriptions and I'm now giving women prescriptions based on a variety of different things on saying long term, if you have this ideology where you always side with women, regardless of whether they're right or wrong, if men sense that in you, why would she change her mindset when she's with you in a relationship? That ideology is the type of woman that's not going to apologize. It's always going to be your fault. Why marry, date, or procreate with or have sex with a woman that is anti-men in every way except her sexual attraction?
Mm.
Why marry and get pregnant women who celebrate abortions? Does that make sense to like, you know, so now
Mm-hmm.
I'm re-questioning and saying, if you say you're pro-family, why are you getting with men or women that are anti that? So you can imagine what the response has been, especially in my
Oh, I
community.
can imagine.
The group think is insane, but it requires people that have balls, courage, and knowledge about what they're talking about to finally challenge this stuff. I would much rather plant the seeds of truth that grow into amazing things 10, 20 years from now, or even years beyond my lifetime, than continue to stay silent and watch my community continue to degenerate and seeing the other racial and economic communities following the worst aspect that's happened in my own. So for me, that's what I'm challenging. And I think with you all doing platforms like this, everybody got their lane of how they want to do it. Dr. Jordan Peterson's done it his way. I'm doing it
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we start fighting back.
I think that's good that people are coming at it from different angles and from different experiences, and because that way, their voice will resonate with somebody if there's more voices, in this space questioning this stuff,
Mhm.
suggesting that maybe there's a different way of looking at things. I think it's really helpful. You know, it seems like the great moral injunction of our time. Well, there's a few. I would say, you know, one is sort of you mustn't interfere with anybody having fun, no matter how that fun affects other people. But the other would be don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. And I was in the grocery store once. I had this strange experience. I was standing in line, and you know how there's all the magazines at the checkout counters. This teenage girl was with her mom, and she saw something about Demi Moore's daughter, Apple, and she said, "Apple? Oh, that's a weird name." And her mom, I mean, it was so fast. Her mom goes, "Don't judge,"
Mm.
and the daughter goes, "Oh, sorry." And I thought, well, that's odd. She didn't. I think there's a difference between judging and condemning. She didn't say Demi Moore is an absolutely horrible person who never should have had kids if she's going to name her kid Apple. She just said that's a weird name. If we don't judge, how can you discern that one pathway is better than another? It's better for me to stay home and study tonight, perhaps, than it is for me to go out and get drunk with my friends. That's a judgment. It's not a condemnation of your friends, it's a judgment. But there's this moral injunction now not to judge that I think has taken root in a way that's not been helpful to us.
Jennifer, you know, as you're saying that, one of the things that I'm thinking is maybe that a part of what this breakdown in culture, part of it is this public-private blurring of the lines, because politeness and not being coarse or rude means that you say the not you don't if you have nothing nice to say, don't if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So don't go around pointing out other people's flaws or loudly criticizing other people. That's part of being a polite culture, being a cultured, period, sophisticated.
Mhm.
But you should be able to have those conversations behind closed doors. That's where you educate your children and reflect on the day and go home and debrief with your spouse after being out at the party and you talk things through. And you're not doing that in order to be judgmental in a nasty, gossipy way. You're doing it in order to process right and wrong and ethics and interpersonal dynamics and all of those things. So, but it sounds like you're almost seeing a window into what must be said behind closed doors with that mother and daughter in that moment because of how reflexive and quick that was. It's like
Mhm.
that's the training that's going on. When you're teaching your children at home that they can't use any discernment and they're not that everything must be okay all the time. Well, their school certainly isn't doing that. They're telling them that you are a bigot and a homophobe if you don't have the right attitudes and if you don't make the right put up the right flag or you know whatever it is the school. This is I think a lot of well-meaning and um, liberal parents felt like they needed to give their kids a blank slate to be who they are, to become the individual. I don't want to push too hard. I don't want to
Mhm.
promote one way of thinking too hard. I want my child to be able to make up their own mind without realizing that you're sending your child out into the world where the other adults don't have that same stance. They very much do have an idea of what your child should be thinking and who they should become. And
Yeah.
so parents end up losing that battle. And parents like that mother who's trying so hard to teach non-judgment, well, when she sends her kid to school, it's an entirely different agenda that's happening there. I spoke with a guy who he's a public school teacher who got fired for reading aloud from To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know if you guys heard this story.
I
His name
remember
is
that story.
Yeah, his name's Matthew Mastronardi. He's from Spokane, Washington. There's the N word is in To Kill a Mockingbird. One of his students said, I bet you wouldn't read that. He said, this is literature and it's contextualized within its time and space, and it's important to read literature as it is. They said you wouldn't do it. And so he did. He read the entire passage. They recorded it. He was fired from his position by the school for doing that, even though his whole work was about promoting contextual cultural understanding. It wasn't in order to denigrate anybody or to be racist or anything like that. He's reading literature. Well, what he said when I interviewed him was that, you know, he lives in a rather conservative area, relatively, Spokane, Washington. That's where I live. And the parents have no idea how leftist the education their children are receiving is.
Mm.
It's a different world inside the school and outside the school.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
just kind of going to that politeness. Yeah, Jeff.
sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
No.
Three things. One, this stuff is only going as far as it is because in order for this type of ideology to work, shame has to be completely eliminated. This is how second, third, and fourth wave feminism is even effective. Everything that they're doing when trying to be like men at this point is all about taking the worst behaviors and worst actions in men and claiming that is now empowerment. Sleep with as many people as you can. Now that's sexual liberation. Constantly be argumentative. Be disrespectful. Now you're just being truthful and honest. I'm like, no, there's tact, there's class with stuff like this. So it only really works in the absence of shame with the most problematic components of this far leftist ideology. Yeah, that's one. And then number two, with what you were just referencing, Leslie, like teacher uses the N word, right? Or uses some new word that you're not supposed to use. This is why I always have nuance to me, I try to get better at trying to learn about the nuance of these things. In any environment, in any working place, if any person uses a racial epithet, like say it, the real word, the institution or the company has grounds to make a decision. So would that be in the direct exact example of the cancellation for me? Partially, as much as it is like emotional intelligence would be like, I probably should just say N-word in place of it. You're free to say it, but when you're working for a private institution, it's not your school. This is always something that can happen. And I think what's happening is as we're all trying to push back from the over censorship that's been taking place, we got to remember there's another far extreme equivalent to that as well. And the other extreme is when we do or espouse, and this is the issue. I want the government to get away from it, and I'm totally comfortable with private institutions and private corporations deciding staff wise, employees wise, what they want to be an accurate representation for who they employ. The problem is that more and more, it's not really the school at this point. It goes beyond the school. It goes to the school district,
That's
federal
right.
funding,
That's right.
and it's
Yep.
hitting us from both ends. To me, where it's like on one end, if you don't push certain things and teach certain things, now your funding was at risk. So now it's on the other end where it's like, well, that means I can say whatever I want. I don't know almost any job where you could say contextual or not, what you want. I'm a black man who's grown up comfortably around people who use the N word all the time and different variations of it. You won't hear my ass say it in the workplace either. And if you think, and so what do we claim that if they fire me for saying the same exact word, contextual or not? So part of this is like, I'm acknowledging that probably shouldn't happen, but I'm also acknowledging that in these type of instances, and I'll give an example. Oh, my last piece before I forget. I have two people in my wedding from a couple years ago that are gay. Open, outward, out the closet, the whole nine, right? I've childhood friends. I've known them since I was 13 years old, so well over 20 years. They're gay. But when I'm on a platform and if I say, I don't understand why during Pride, why there's children at Pride with men with their genitalia hanging out and buttocks exposed, that seems bizarre to me. That seems groomer-ish to me.
I would
That's
agree.
disgusting,
Yeah.
right?
Not appropriate.
Because I have friends that are gay, that does not mean I'm not allowed to say that. And what I think is happening in workplaces and friendships and amongst family, people aren't willing to stand on truth at risk of relationships. And what I'm going to argue, if you're going to attack shame, if you're going to raise the standards, you actually have to be willing to be okay with the consequences that comes with that. That may mean you can't work at certain places. That may mean certain friends don't want to invite you or include you in certain aspects of their life. Truth comes with a cost. And what crazy enough, as time change over time, a lot of these people end up coming back anyway. Over time, a lot of these people that cut you off, turn their back on you, when it's no longer when the ideology that was dominant, we're seeing a decline in youth now identifying with trans-related ideology. We're now seeing that. We're now seeing a steep decline in the public education system because it's no longer trendy, apparently, to do this. So I think when we stigmatize the things we should, and we stand on truth and bring shame back, that's how we start to change the wheels with this stuff. I won't be shocked in the next 3-4 years if there's a counter movement. We see it. I don't know if have you either you heard about the quarter zip movement?
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's so
What's
cool.
that?
I love it. I love the
Quarter
videos.
zip quarter zip movement that started trending in the last couple of months was young Black African Americans, which are a lot of in our culture we call them YNs or young N words. These are the ones that were walking around with the Nike track suits on, with the hoodies up, with the mask on. They were doing this stuff even prior to COVID, right? And they just had the look where you didn't know where their mentality would be. Are they trying to rob you? Are they just a kid? You have no idea. And countercultural wise, in the last 2 months, just because, not because of some big institution pushed it or because it's this algorithm thing, Black American males from 2024 till now have decided we're going to take back our image. And the first thing they did was take back dress code. And we're now saying all that pants hanging off your ass and looking crazy and we want you wearing button ups and quarter zips sweatshirts, and that's the
That's
new
so
wave.
funny. My husband
And
wears quarter zips. I'm going to tell him he's
listen,
part of the quarter zip movement. He doesn't
yep,
even know.
yep. He been now. To be fair, the Carlton Banks of the world, from the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, and your husband, and grown ass men been doing this their whole lives. But now you're taking young guys that would have never worn a tie, never worn a suit, never worn this stuff. They're now flipping the script. They're
Love
now saying we're
that.
going to take our image. And then the second piece is you're now having rappers who grew up and built their careers recently talking about criminality, crime, violence, and everything. You now have very known, reputable, well-off, big platform rappers in the last 2 weeks saying F the streets, meaning F all the criminality and F all that because they're saying the real white supremacists is the ones that's killing people that look like us. Y'all are far more effective than the Klan could ever imagine. So when I say to Black women, y'all have been more effective with these abortions than the Klan and white supremacy could ever imagine. That hits home way better and more
That's
hard.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So if I see you posting and sharing that you had a divorce party, that you talking about you on your 12th abortion, and these are the women I'm telling my guys, like they're a liability. You got to stay away from them. Period. So I'm bringing shame back. I'm speaking on truth, whether it's friends, family, or coworkers. If it applies to you, you can change your behavior. You can improve. But if I find out that that's the type of time you on, I now see you as a high risk liability. I don't do life with you. I don't connect with you. I don't party with you. I don't build with you. I don't marry you. I don't have sex with you. That's what it's going to be. So now we're seeing a counter trend happening within our community. When we thought it was a lost cause, we're now seeing an organic thing happening where me wearing a red hat that says make masculinity great again, apparently that it equals a MAGA hat. And and 2 weeks ago, I went to the hood for a live show, wearing a three-piece suit in the hood for a live show with some security and all rappers coming in there. And I wore that red hat and sat on that stage and said a whole bunch of the stuff y'all saying about, especially what happened to our community. And I'm saying, well, y'all can't keep claiming y'all want leaders and y'all want men. Where's masculinity? Where's the leaders? Where's the real men at? But you're not willing to get up from the steering wheel. I said 60 years of y'all being in the driver's seat. We've been functioning a cultural matriarchy. Have we gotten to the destination y'all been leading us to? Or y'all ready to get up out the seat? Which is it? Y'all, we got to keep listening to y'all politically, socially, economically, or y'all, we comfortable with acknowledging it's not that y'all are idiots, but it's very clear you can't be the leaders of the community anymore.
Well, I think that it's time for people to come in with better ideas because I think when there's a power vacuum, somebody has to take the wheel. And part of the issue is, I think after some of the big wars, there was such the men of our culture were hit with such a blow. I'm not only many men killed, but also many men spiritually wounded in a way that left a vacuum for a long time. And And if people are starting to come back with strong ideas, I think that's a very positive thing. And I love the quarter zip thing.
Hey.
I think presentation, I have always felt like fashion is not a stupid thing. It is an important thing. The way that you present yourself shows people how you care about yourself, shows you how you're going to treat yourself and how you're going to treat them, and how seriously you take your relationships and your presentation. And I think it's incredibly important. My two sons are 14 and 12, and they kind of on their own sort of adopted a good style when they were younger. They've always worn hats. They wear like boater hats in the summer and flat caps in the winter. And it's amazing to see how well the world responds to a well-dressed young man, because everywhere we go, they get a ton of compliments. And I just think that's been such a positive thing for them. Any parents of boys, I would say, dress your kids well, and the world will welcome them and respect them in a way that they wouldn't get noticed if they were just running around in sweatsuits, you know. So I think it's a
Listen,
very important thing.
same thing. Same thing. I'm
Mhm.
trying to get men to recognize you can't keep complaining about women and how they're dressing nowadays, especially in our community, and you're not rewarding the women that are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You're not rewarding them with rings. You're not rewarding them with marriage. You're not rewarding them with serious monogamous committed relationships if you two have agreed to that. So it's the same thing. Like we culturally, we have if we bring shame back and reward people that are doing the right thing, a lot of this, regardless of how much money they pump into this stuff behind the scenes, if it's not popping, if it's not the wave, if people don't care about it anymore, if people are like shaming that stuff, it's going to get corny. And industries and corporations, there's one thing that they care about more than anything else: money,
Mhm.
profit. So when hip hop sales have declined over the last 2 years, so something's happening on the lower levels that I think over time people are going to start to see. And I'm going to be honest with you, Gen Z right now, Gen Z boys and men, people can complain about a lot of different things. They're not acquiescing and following the far left liberalization of the culture anymore. They're splitting with their women and they're young girls and women, and they're now more politically divided than baby boomers, Gen X, millennials. They are more divided. Now, my goal is not for that division to just stay permanently. My goal is for men to stop being led by their women in these areas that are leading us down a hellhole. Women are smart, they're brilliant, they can lead at a whole host of things. If they in my community, if they've decided open borders is fine, if they've decided that we can't speak about what's happening in our schools, if they've decided a whole host of things that I know is hurting us, I know is harming us, I can't be led by y'all no more. Sorry. Sorry, that's what it is. And most men in my community, I've said it before, there's no men left in the Democrat Party today. There's males, just males. Because the difference is a man is willing to stand on what's true, even if the women in his life disagree. So if all the men that are still identifying in 2025 with this ideology and just agreeing with, oh yeah, late term abortions, I'm rocking with it. Yeah, girl, well, you do what you want. I would never judge your past. You could have lived a life and done all those men that's gassing up the worst things that's making our community and our country worse. You're not meant to be. You're males that's listening to and again operating off of consensus thinking. Again, what's the percentage of us that grew up in single mother households? What's the percentage of us that's following? If you can't say any of the things that I said today as a man, why would I call you that?
Mhm. Well
So
said. And
that's what I've been. Again, my style is radically different. It's a little jarring and shocking, but I
I
know
like
what
it.
my community. I know what we need. And then Jennifer and Leslie, y'all got probably a whole different approach. But I'll tell you this: what I'm interested in, what Leslie spoke on, and her different topics catered to me and brought me into this space there, and then when I take what I'm learning from Leslie, you, Jen, and other people, I'm now translating that into the different groups that I'm talking to and pitching for. And the main thing with me is as long as I don't change, the
Mhm.
style and tone can change. But when I'm in a professional setting, it's this space. When I go to a mosque in early next year and start talking to Muslims, I'm going to be doing the same thing. When I go into
Mhm.
churches, same thing. And then when I'm on social media, same thing. So the truth is the truth, regardless of where I'm at. My job is just to take it with me. And I appreciate you guys, you ladies, doing this and giving opportunities and shedding light on this because it's cool to know that there's a movement that's been happening for a while. I'm late apparently. So I really appreciate y'all for doing stuff like this because it's needed. It's needed in an environment where truth is so relative to where it's the word truth itself is meaningless.
Well, I really appreciate your voice and your approach, and I think that it gives me hope to see that message being said, that it, instead of just being pounded down, men can figure out an ethical response and take the lead on that. And I think that you'll see a lot of people won't follow, a lot of men and a lot of women won't follow, but good women will follow good men. And I think because we need each other. And so at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about. And I appreciate what you're saying, and your approach is a breath of fresh air. Can you tell people where to find you?
Oh, Ask a Brother podcast, Brotha, for those who didn't maybe write that down before or they never used to spelling it that way. Ask a Brother podcast is on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok for now. Very soon, we're about to launch onto Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Rumble, and X or Twitter. I'm the same guy. Now, what's weird right now is I'm starting to get recognized in public. So that's a little strange because when I'm in the hood in Atlanta and the name of the projects, and I'm wearing a three-piece suit with a red hat on, walking around talking about stuff, and 5, 6 people recognize me. And again, I just launched this stuff this year, and I'm in Philly, and I get off the airport, and my Lyft driver recognized me. When I get to the
Wow,
event,
Wow.
multiple
that's
people recognize
amazing.
me. Then one guy drove 100 miles from a neighboring state to come to support. And when I got in my Lyft to head back to the airport, I'm at the restaurant bar, and a guy and his wife or girlfriend comes up, says, "Bro, I love your content. Keep doing what you're doing. You're bringing light to things that we've never been allowed to feel like we could say." And then the bartender, when he gave me my bill, said, "Bro, by the way, I love everything
Oh
that
my
you're doing."
gosh.
So that's great in the sense that like
Wow.
they like it, but the problem is not every person who's watching this agrees or is happy with it. And now, I ain't trying to be Charlie Kirk right now. So, I got to start being a little bit smarter with, I guess how I move with this stuff, because although I'm standing on truth, I'm still moving like this is nobody knows I exist. And like 2 months ago, when I'm walking to get a fruit shake from around the corner, a car pulls up next to me, stops, and a black gentleman jumps out the front passenger seat and points at me and says, "You want a podcast?" And I was like, do you like it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I love your stuff." And I said, "Yes, it's me." But I realized now in hindsight, like, in probably been recognized 10 times in the last 90 days, and which isn't maybe a lot for people. It's really, really big. But for me, I just started this stuff like 11 months ago. And now people in Philly and in Miami, New York, and Atlanta are starting to randomly recognize me. So I think the one caveat I'll give people is that if you want to do or follow this type of stuff, and you're going to speak against people who feel very strongly about this, just be mindful and smart with where you're moving and how you're moving. Because unfortunately, although we're trying to push truth and righteousness and literally like standards again, there's people who not only feel the exact opposite, which they're allowed to do, but there's actually people that want to stop you
Yes.
in any way they can. As soon as I went viral the first time, my license ID, where I went to school, everything started getting posted on YouTube within a
Oh
week.
my gosh.
Within a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's real bullying tactics, you
Yeah,
know?
now I'm a
Yeah.
grown man. Listen, I'm a grown man, and the difference is it's hard to bully a bully. I love I'm a little bit toxic like that. I enjoy
Mhm.
it. I love it, and what's the funny way to say it? I like to smoke. I like when people try to challenge me, because if we have to actually do this on camera, and
Mhm.
you actually got to explain what you believe and why. And I've been reading on it for 5, 10 plus years. I'm going to enjoy it.
You're
You
ready.
might not, but I'm going to
Yeah.
enjoy it. And my view is I don't mind people disagreeing. I just want us to be allowed to do that again.
In a
Yeah.
fair and good faith way.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, we're going to continue this dialogue off the recording and off the live stream. It was great to spend this day with everybody on the live. Thank you all for joining us and chiming in. And I hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful Christmas. and enjoy your time with your friends and families. We'll see you next Monday. And now we're going to go off, and I'm going to ask Jeff St. James about pornography and OnlyFans with our
Ooh.
members only group. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Take care, all. All right, let me stop the recording.